The ESO devs are talking about some more combat changes in Update 51, and this will make changes to the Dragonknight, Werewolf, Templar, Nightblade, Necromancer, and Warden. Pretty much everything here is getting touched. And the real story kind of behind these changes, as Kevin stated here, it's because of all the feedback from the last 2 weeks of Update 51's public test server. Some of these changes we've already talked about with the Templar, and they were not originally planned. These are mainly direct reactions to the last 2 weeks of that public test server feedback. And they hit both on PvP and PvE in ways that will shift the meta depending on what you really play. So let's go ahead and hop right into it class by class. First up is the Dragonknight, and this is probably the bigger nerf out of all the classes. Core of Flame, the resource restore reduced from 15 to 12. Heart of Flame, healing reduced by 20%. Landslide generates faster, stacks higher at 12, and decays slower. But when it comes to Earthspike Mantle, the damage bonus now only applies to monsters. They said this is to prevent any issues with PvP after the landslide buff. And for Seething Fury, of course, Molten Whip, the buff is halved in PvP. They did not say that it is halved in PvE. It looks like this halved buff is only for PvP. And that's going to be the big one, because now in PvP, that DK burst combo is getting toned down. And for Power Lash, lower direct damage, adding a small PvE damage bonus after charges. Once again, less PvP burst, but slight compensation in PvE. I don't know how big of a deal that one's going to be. We'll have to wait and see. Overall, the DK is still going to be strong, but that oppressive PvP burst that a lot of people have been talking about looks like it's getting reeled in a bit. And of course, all the classes we're going over here when it comes to combat changes may end up having some numbers adjusted before the end of the public test server or even into Update 51, so just keep that in mind. When it comes to the Templar, players have been kind of upset with some of the changes over the last couple of weeks in the public test server patch notes. Zos has talked about some targeted boosts. I'm still not sure if everyone's going to agree with these, or they're still going to feel like they're losing some damage with their Templar if they're using a DPS class. But Balanced Warrior has more complex formula, no cap, and it will scale with armor and slotted Templar skills. When it comes to Judgment's brand, the damage bonus is increased to 1600. That will still be halved in PvP. And for Lancer, the AoE now spawns on you if you're standing still. So this is going to reward the hold your ground gameplay. It sounds like the Templar is getting a bit more sturdy and more rewarding for true class identity. I'm still going to be curious to see the community's response to these changes for the Templar overall. And for the Nightblade, Strife is going to see a bit of a new identity. It grants 1% damage done per 10% health while active. And this is a unique buff that does scale with your survivability. They said they've also seen some pushback on its cost increase, so they're still evaluating that. But they don't really want to give it the degree of power that it had in the Somerset era. And I'm sure a lot of you probably remember that if you played ESO back then. Strife was really good at one point. And it's something that I've always used, or at least off and on my Nightblade. So I will be curious to see if this small buff is really worth applying to your Nightblade class. When it comes to the Necromancer, Nothing Wasted loses 2 stacks instead of 3 and will decay every 12 seconds instead of 15. Now, Goliath is where it's going to get a bit interesting. Bash has a 1-second cooldown, but deals 73% more damage. They said this will remove the awkward double bash weave meta. That one's going to be the one that I think a lot of people will either really like the sound of, and I think most people will, but some may not really like the idea as much. Once again, we'll have to wait and see kind of how the community responds once they get hands-on with this. But I do think a lot of people will like that 73% more damage on hit. And when it comes to Frozen Colossus, it will deal more damage, 12.5% more, and costs less, 150 ultimate for the update, while they're working on long-term changes. They says, or it says, we will ultimately revert these in the future update for a more PvE targeted approach, as the ultimate isn't weak in PvP as it stands now. So it looks like we're going to see some more changes in the future for PvE. This is kind of just their change right now as almost really a placeholder. The Warden saw a few small buffs during this refresh. They say these are not final. The Warden is mid-refresh, so changes are still kind of limited. We know that the Warden is the next class on the list for the combat changes. Now that will be pushed into next year instead of this year, but they are trying to make a few small changes along the way. For Fetcher Infection, it's a 75% bonus every other cast, up from 60%. And Arctic Blast is 20% more damage per tick. Overall, these are very minor improvements while the full rework continues. Now, there are a few miscellaneous changes, one of them being Dragonknight's healing reduction now is halved in PvP. Since his bonus is halved, it's less punishing to use after being reduced. They said they've also put the 2 and 4 piece bonuses to weapon and spell damage instead of those other stat lines. They said they're still interested in updating stat lines for older sets like you saw they did in update 49, and they will do as many as time and bandwidth allows for smaller efforts such as this. Now, a lot of people have been talking about the same thing I've been talking about on the channel here for years. We have so many sets in game that no one uses and have not used for a very long time. And I think most people, instead of seeing brand new sets added in all the time, every year, they would like to see some of these older sets reworked to make them useful. And if we had more useful sets in game, it gives you more variety, of course, when you are building your class. Now, when it comes to Ice Comet, it does more damage over time at 21%, helping it climb up the mountain of distance between it and Shooting Star. It also now snares enemies whenever it deals any damage rather than only that initial hit, helping keep enemies inside that area. And kind of some usual, they said, bug fixes and tooltip updates as well within this. They talked about they will continue to monitor feedback based on these adjustments. It says, as Nick outlined in his letter earlier, they want to focus on quality experiences over the calendar dates, so these efforts may take longer than before. That being said, they will continue to take note of things that people are talking about for future updates and continue to search for ways to take a smaller, more targeted approach like this as the march of time continues. So they're still saying that some of these changes may take a while. We may see some smaller tweaks here and there to things as kind of placeholders until they get an actual bigger fix or a bigger change in for each individual class. At least they are making some changes. I think a lot of people were concerned after all the news of everything going on at ZOS. They read the public test server patch notes for update 51 in week 1. They saw some of the changes. They weren't really happy with them. It looks like ZOS is trying to go in and tweak some things that they may not have had planned just yet to release into the game. But with some of these smaller targeted changes, hopefully this will help out, especially with everyone in PvP who is, of course, tired of all the DK spam, and I'm sure Werewolf spam that we have seen changes to as well in the week 1 public test server patch notes. Hopefully that will help out. As always, we have to wait and see, because as we know, sometimes things get changed in ESO that are not really supposed to affect PvE, and they end up affecting PvE, or vice versa, or the changes are not still just enough for whatever they're trying to work out, nerf or buff wise. Leave me a comment with your thoughts, and of course, if you like the video, hit the like. If you have not subscribed yet, please do so, and I'll catch you next time. Peace.